Hi guys! The last two episodes were about Anatoly Dyatlov, so today we are going to proceed with that subject. We still have 4 more chapters to cover, but to remind you what we already told you about. In the first video we spoke about Dyatlov's early life, education and the beginning of his career. If you want to watch it, save the link from the upper right corner for later. I made a typo there, so we have to correct it now. I told you that he started to work at Chernobyl nuclear power plant in 1983 at the age of 52, but I was supposed to say 1973, so analogically he was 42 years old. Sorry for that mistake and a big thank you to our viewer who pointed out that mistake. The second episode of Dyatlov's story was wholly committed to the day of the Chernobyl disaster. What happened, why it probably happened, what we know for sure and what we can only assume was most probable. Again, save the link from the upper right corner for later. And don't worry, you don't need to watch these episodes in chronological order. It would be easier to watch, but it's not necessary to learn what we wanted to share about Dyatlov's life. So, this time it's going to be a shorter video, as we're going to speak about what happened after the explosion of reactor number 4 at Chernobyl nuclear power plant and about Dyatlov's sickness. These are also important parts as they too explain a lot about his later story. The imprisonment, the trial and the later stage of life. Enough of the intro, let's start the episode. Chapter 5. After the explosion. I have to quickly sum up the day of the disaster chapter, so if you haven't watched it yet, you would get the context. Despite we will talk about what happened after the disaster, we have to go back in time just minutes and hours after the explosion. When it hit the power plant, Dyatlov couldn't believe it was the reactor that caused the explosion. If we are to believe people being in the control room of Unit 4, he was behaving anxiously and some orders he gave were illogical. Actually, as I said in the previous video, in Chernobyl episode 5, HBO portrayed his behavior pretty well, at least if we believe his staff, that is. But in reality, Dyatlov himself admitted to some mistakes later, so we know for sure that at least some of his orders were true and not any kind of misinterpretation or misinformation of his subordinates. And I speak about this because they could be equally held responsible for the disaster, so there was a room for them to cover their own mistakes. Not that I know they did try to put themselves in a better light, but it could happen. And all we know about what happened in the control room of Unit 4 was either a result of different simulations, information from the documents written or signed before the disaster, and the people's testimonies. And as we all know, the latter can be misleading, as being under so much stress and fearing for their lives could impact the way they saw or described the event. As for the mistakes, Dyatlov did admit, for example, that the decision to send 2 of his staff to lower the control rods manually was completely illogical. Also, he decided to pump water into the reactor while he was still sure it didn't explode. From our perspective, it was also a mistake, but we have the privilege of knowing what happened and what the decisions later caused. After the initial orders were given and he didn't believe one of his staff that the reactor was destroyed, he himself left the room to evaluate the situation. As he said, he also wanted to find the missing worker, probably known to you, Valery Khodemchuk. As he proceeded around the building, he must have seen the debris scattered around. In HBO's Chernobyl, he is shown walking down the corridor with all the windows broken and he looks at the ground. I think that this scene was supposed to ensure that he saw all the evidence that the reactor had exploded, but refused to believe it. I wouldn't be so sure. Remember, he was already taking a lot of radiation. He could be in shock, and also everything he knew about the reactors contradicted the idea of RBMK exploding. People under stress behave very differently, and often not logically. I will give you an example from my own experience. Last year, I was driving the highway. The car in front of me suddenly lost a wheel. It completely fell off. Fortunately, the driver managed to safely slide into the emergency lane. When I stopped, he wasn't listening to anything I said. His wife was shaking. I checked if they had any injuries and had to tell him at least 4 or 5 times to get behind the barrier in case any incoming car won't see the accident happen and hit his damaged car, which was stopped in the side lane. He even said he was going to get the wheel that was about 150 meters away and on the other side of the highway. So imagine that. Cars speeding up to 150-200 km per hour on 3 lanes, and he wants to get to the other side for his lost wheel. Would you say now, hearing this, that it was anything necessary to do at that time? I had to instruct him what to do literally word by word, with short commands, as he was listening but couldn't hear what I said. That's a shock. And I'm speaking only about some minor accident when nobody was hurt and fortunately everything was taken care of quickly. So imagine what people in the control room of Unit 4 could feel. I think the body and mind responses are not to be ignored when analyzing that kind of situation. But let's get back to Dyatlov. After a short time, he began to feel weak, he started vomiting. That was the result of acute radiation syndrome, which I described in some of the previous episodes. Because of that, he gathered the documents from the control room and went to see Brukhanov, the power plant director, to explain what happened. Until his death, Dyatlov blamed the design flaws. In his opinion, they were reason behind this tragedy. He also argued that the USSR couldn't take responsibility for it and blamed the power plant staff instead. Dyatlov actually agreed to an interview in 1994, shortly before his death and after the Soviet Union fell, and he also wrote a book in which he described more from his memories. It's clear that the reactor flaws were an important part of the Chernobyl disaster, but how big? It's still an open dispute. Dyatlov himself said in the book, "The reactor didn't comply with more than 30 standard design requirements, more than enough for an explosion. Before the protection was lifted, the reactor was reaching a nuclear bomb-like state, and there was no alarm signal. How could the staff learn about it? By smell? By touch? Before talking about the fault of the staff, just think about it. The reactor was detonated by its emergency system. And we can't disagree with Dyatlov. The one thing that was supposed to be the last resort, the last stand against a huge disaster, was flawed. And it caused the one thing nobody of the staff expected. One of the things it was supposed to guard the power plant against. The fatal AZ-5 baton was the final nail in the coffin." Chapter 6. We don't exactly know what happened at the meeting with Brukhanov, besides what they told us during Chernobyl trial. But we know that Dyatlov was admitted to Pripyat hospital shortly after. It is estimated that he acquired a huge dose of radiation, around 3.9 sieverts. Despite that high exposure usually kills around 50% of people in 30 days, Dyatlov survived. He initially refused the treatment, but he was just ignoring the obvious thing. After the hospital's personnel confirmed that he had acute radiation syndrome, he was quickly transported to Moscow Hospital No. 6. 2 days later, the symptoms of radiation sickness had mostly vanished, which is a typical thing. People that acquired such a high dose of ionizing radiation almost always show signs of getting better quickly and out of proportion to what they were exposed to. During that time, in Moscow, he was visited and questioned several times. Despite HBO didn't show this, he supposedly discussed the event with Akimov and Toptunov, but he recalled they were disoriented as to what exactly happened. It's very different from what HBO has shown us, right? In the miniseries, we see Dyatlov basically refusing any responsibility and being reluctant to even speak to the fictional character of Uliana Komyuk. As happens with radiation sickness, after initial signs of recovery, Dyatlov's condition worsened. We may call these delayed effects. He thought a lot to stay alive. It's hard to describe what happens to a person with acute radiation syndrome caused by such a high dose. The first thing is pain. Many people that somehow survived it describe the sickness as the pain that doesn't go away even in sleep, if they could sleep, that is. Because of that, patients with ARS are administered significant doses of painkillers, but at some point, it's unimaginable pain that often no doctor can do anything about. Despite this, Dyatlov recovered, and he recalled that the care he received in Moscow's Hospital No. 6 was exceptional, and probably that this helped him stay alive. That's it for today, guys. Don't forget to watch the previous episodes about Dyatlov and explore our channel to learn more about Chernobyl disaster and Chernobyl exclusion zone. If you have an idea what we could make a video about, feel free to share it in the comments. Stay tuned because in the next week we will continue the Dyatlov story. Take care, stay safe, and see you next week.